Good evening, this is the Oscar expert here, and it's time to talk about Aftersun in depth with spoilers. Seen it twice now, have a lot to say about a movie that I feel is a masterpiece. This video has no regard for spoilers. It is not intended for you to watch it if you haven't seen the movie, and I would hate for this video to be what spoils the movie for you. So to give a quick sum up, Aftersun is about a woman reflecting on a vacation that she had with her father 2 decades ago when she was 11 years old. And there's clearly joy and love in their connection, but there's also this tension or pressure beneath the surface that's slowly building up that stems from the dad's mental health issues that he's quietly dealing with. By the end, this fairly languid film becomes deeply painful as we learn that this vacation was the last time that these two ever saw each other. It's implied that Calum committed suicide after this vacation, leaving Sophie with just memories and video footage to pore over and piece together who he was and what she couldn't see in him before. It's very clear that Calum is quietly dealing with depression throughout their vacation. Moments in the beginning where he slides out the back door for a cigarette while Sophie is sleeping and does this dance paints a portrait of a man trying to ease his mind. The same goes for the father's interest in Tai Chi. We see that he's bought several books on it and he practices often. Sophie just thinks in the moment that he's just doing his goofy ninja moves, which speaks to the separation that exists between who Sophie thought that she was looking at and who she was really looking at. Him saying he doesn't know how he made it to 30 and doesn't think he can make it to 40. Calum's mental state is pretty half-sketched, but I think that's very intentional. We get some clues as to why he might be feeling this way, but we don't ever fully understand it because we only are given as many clues as Sophie has, which makes sense considering that this entire movie is from Sophie's perspective. And also sometimes mental illness and depression don't even have a clear source that you can point to. But that being said, you know, what can we see? Calum is a man whose life has clearly not gone according to plan. Even the fact that he became a father to Sophie at the young age of 20 implies that he may have missed out on some key moments in his development or his 20s. We learn that he's not together with Sophie's mother and that he struggles financially, which is something that clearly brings him a lot of shame. Like we see how he beats himself up over not being able to buy this rug, or when Sophie loses the expensive goggles, he seems to spiral a little bit mentally in these moments. And when asked by Sophie, where did you think you would be when you were 11? It's pretty painful for him to think about, and he doesn't seem to want to answer. To think about the time that he, like Sophie at 11 years old, felt that the entire world was in front of him. And now at age 31, he is a financially struggling, separated parent of an 11-year-old. Aftersun is very insightful about how the characters' respective ages play into the different realities that they're navigating. In the beginning of the movie, Sophie jokes that her dad is turning 130, but beneath this joke, I think, is the feeling that 31 just feels so far away to an 11-year-old. Sophie is basically in the middle of like her own coming of age journey on this vacation, but in contrast, Calum doesn't even know how he made it to age 30. Sophie is almost at her beginning, and Calum feels like he is approaching a dead end in his life. He feels lost in time. That's why birthdays are so exciting to Sophie, but so painful to Calum. At the end of the movie, Sophie thinks that he would probably like it if she got everybody to sing happy birthday to him. But when she does, Calum just seems like haunted by this moment. When you're 11, every age feels like a new chapter in your life. But at a certain point, age can become a scary thing. Calum tells Sophie that she can be whatever she wants to be because she has time. And I think he almost says this enviously, feeling like he no longer has time on his side. And that's why it's also significant that Sophie, in the present day, looking back on these memories, is now the same age as her father. And she's also a parent now. So perhaps from this perspective of her being older, she can understand more about him and empathize with his experience in a way that she just wasn't capable of doing when she was 11. And I think it's implied by the dark lighting in Sophie's present day apartment that she has probably been to very dark places in her life. No doubt her dad leaving was one of them, and I think she now has a greater understanding of what he was going through. Much of Aftersun details how Sophie and Calum are having opposite internal experiences at this resort, despite them, you know, spending most of their time together. Sophie thinks it's nice that everybody shares the same sky, and much of Aftersun involves the two staring at the sky or playing in the water. The blue of the sky and the sea often bleed together visually, and occasionally the film transitions seamlessly from shots of the sky to shots of the sea or the pool, so maybe those things are kind of the same in terms of what they symbolize. But for sure the water, I think, is something that represents something different to each of these characters. To Sophie, water is beautiful and bright glistening, and it represents possibility and dreams. From underwater, she gazes at the teens in the resort, imagining her future. Sophie clearly admires the older kids and looks forward to being a teenager. And lots of the older kids also have this all-inclusive band that lets them get things for free at the resort, which is something that her dad certainly can't afford for them. And the fact that that's associated with the teenagers, I think, has to do with Sophie's vision of the future. You know, the possibility that she could have like this all-access pass. Like in that moment where Sophie's underwater looking at all the teenagers being romantic and everything, that yellow all-access band is clearly in view. But to Calum, water is dark, menacing, and bottomless. When Sophie loses her goggles in the ocean, which is a financial blow to Calum, he just kind of sadly watches the goggles like drift down into the dark sea. And there's that moment towards the end where Calum wanders into the ocean at night when his mental health problems hit a peak, and the blackness of the sea fully engulfs him. Like the water is thrashing and aggressive, and the blackness of it almost implies like death. So even the water in this film represents two different things to these different characters, which speaks to how our subjective experiences of the world can be so vastly different. At 11, Sophie's at an age where she's starting to develop more emotional perceptiveness. That's an age where you start to take a little bit of a deeper interest in relationships and people. And Frankie Corio, to her credit, really brings that maturity, but also that silliness that an 11-year-old has. It's just as much about her trying to understand her father at age 11 as it is about her later on in life trying to understand her father. Some moments that I think are clear examples of Sophie taking an interest in her dad and knowing him on a deeper level when she asks, "Where did you think you'd be when you were 11?" Asking him questions that he doesn't always want to answer. And in that brilliant shot where we see Sophie recording the moment with her mind camera, where the conversation between the two is being reflected off of a blank TV, I think that speaks to just Sophie trying to record her father. And I think that she can tell that there's something like a little bit wrong. When she loses her expensive goggles and her dad is quietly upset about it, she leans on him and she says, "I know they were expensive." And he almost seems like surprised that she noticed. This gesture shows that she's like aware that he has these economic problems, and she doesn't want to be kept away from knowing these things just because she's a kid. There's also that moment where she gestures to him that like she knows that he smokes cigarettes, which is something that he doesn't want to tell her. And she kind of gives him this look like, it's okay, like I know. And then there's the moment where she puts the sheets on Calum as he's passed out in his bed after his spiral of a night. And the composition of the shot mirrors the shot in the beginning of the film where Calum tucks Sophie in and then goes out the back for a cigarette. I think the shot shows that Sophie feels like she is capable of taking care of her dad in the way that he is capable of taking care of her. And when her dad apologizes for that rough night, when they're at the clay pools, she doesn't really say anything, but she just like rubs the clay on him. And I think that's a sign of her trying to forgive and comfort him. She asks him where he got the mark on his shoulder, and he doesn't tell her. She's more than ready to listen, even if it cracks the portrait of the perfect happy dad that Calum wants to put on. He tells Sophie that she can tell him anything about boys and drugs that she takes. But what's tragic is that Calum won't reciprocate that same openness that he's asking of Sophie. There's a great scene where they're in the hotel room and Calum is taking his cast off and he's like quietly in pain and he cuts himself and he's bleeding. And Sophie is on the other side of the wall, just kind of picking his brain, trying to ask more about his relationship with her mom. But while he's giving her some answers, he's hiding something more painful, like literally going on with his arm, but also, you know, not literally, like metaphorically hiding his pain. And the cast in general, I think, is just symbolic of like him having an injury. And the shot composition of this scene is really brilliant. The contrast of warm and cold lighting and the wall as a barrier. This shot illustrates the rift between these two and Calum's failure to allow the two to fully connect, as well as their vastly different emotional states on this vacation. There is one scene where Calum does reveal something sad about his life, where on his 11th birthday, his parents and everybody forgot. Maybe this explains that he had a poor support system or an uncaring family. Maybe that contributed to like his poor mental health. Or maybe this piece of information is important because it shows how Calum is trying harder to be a good dad to Sophie like his parents weren't to him. But in really each moment of the film, Calum is being a pretty awesome dad. He and Sophie get to watch like other kids throwing tantrums and think, well, like, you know, that's not us. And yet the devastating realization at the end of Aftersun is that sometimes love isn't enough, especially in the face of severe mental illness and depression. And I'm sure that looking back, Sophie is trying the best she can to be grateful for and hold on to the genuine love and guidance that her father gave her, despite that she may have trouble forgiving him for leaving. A lot of the communication in Aftersun is kind of indirect. Characters don't always say what they're really thinking. But one way that Charlotte Wells communicates what's going on underneath the surface is through music. The film's soundtrack, as well as scenes of dancing and singing. Many of the song choices register as being very significant. Tender by Blur seems like the soundtrack to Calum's Mind, which is about someone who wants to get through the demons in their life to reach this great feeling of love, which the song says is the greatest feeling that we have. And Losing My Religion comes at a very significant moment in the film where Sophie sings it during karaoke alone, as Calum watches and refuses to join her because he's just not in the mood. He can't bring himself to do it. And Sophie singing these lyrics, that's me in the corner, that's me in the spotlight, losing my religion. It just sounds like what's happening to her at this very moment, like losing faith in her father. The song is really about someone romantically pining for someone who they realize never wanted them back, but in this context, it's about Sophie not being able to reach her dad. And many of the songs also seem to read differently in hindsight, you know, like most things in the film. When we look back on them knowing how this story ended, the lyrics take on a new meaning. Especially, I thought that I heard you laughing, I thought that I heard you sing, I think I thought I saw you try. And finally, the use of Under Pressure by Queen and David Bowie, which soundtracks the climactic moment of the film. The refrain of Under Pressure itself speaks to the tension building in this relationship and the pain stewing inside of her dad. And that repeated lyric, like, why can't we give love, I think that really speaks to the pain of this moment and the realization that giving love wasn't enough. And also the lyric, love dares you to care for people on the edge of the night. You know, I think of Sophie caring for Calum. And then this is our last dance has a pretty obvious meaning, but when this lyric is repeated as the audience is realizing that we actually are watching the last dance of Sophie and Calum, you know, it destroys you a little bit. But in a way, it's not really their last dance because we see this dance going on inside of Sophie's mind between her and her father. This tension that she has with him really will never go away. In the final moments of Aftersun, which I just think are like absolutely devastating and brilliant, the movie bursts into this collage between the past and the present and the space in which Calum exists in Sophie's mind, which is presented as this strobing pitch black rave. And this space is definitely meant to be abstract and to speak on more of like an emotional, visceral level. Like I think the strobing resonates because Sophie may feel like in her memory, her dad seems to come back like in these flashes and then he's just gone again. And the blackness of this space definitely feels like the endless void in someone's mind or even like death. And I think that it recalls the blackness of the ocean that Calum walked into, as well as that shot in the beginning where he's out on the porch and like the blackness of night. And I think that it also makes sense that Sophie imagines him dancing in this space because she remembers him for his goofy dance moves. And they are truly moments where Calum seems like happy and loose and more at peace. His physical movement, whether he's dancing or doing Tai Chi, seems to really bring him that calm. But this space in Sophie's mind also allows us to see how she interacts with him in her mind in the present day, sometimes screaming at him, shoving him, wrestling with him. These moments, I think, capture the anger that she has towards him for leaving her and also for not letting her be there for him. And in other moments, she seems to be clinging on to him the same way that she did while dancing with him as a kid, very lovingly, seemingly trying to grab hold of that love that he did have for her. And at other times, it's like this combination of both. This choreography between the two feels like a tug-of-war between all the conflicting feelings that she has about her father, the love and the pain that he brought her. And all the while, Calum looks almost unresponsive to anything that she does. Like, he can't interact with her, I guess, because, you know, he's gone. But this feels so frustrating to watch. Like, she's screaming, trying to hold on to him, trying to shove him. It feels like Sophie is silently screaming into the void. Really, the scene shows how decades later, Sophie is still navigating an evolving relationship with her father, even though he's not there anymore. And now that she's his age, she's probably been to those darker places in her life. She probably empathizes more with him. And without showing us anything between the moment that she last saw her dad in the airport all the way up to the moment right now where she's watching this back at his age, we don't see any of that, and yet I think we really feel the weight of that space in between. A lot of power in the ending, I think, is this realization that our relationship to the past and to people who are gone from our lives is always evolving. And the film's really brilliant at showing how when somebody passes, our memories of them become significant in a way that we could never anticipate. And the way that that leaves somebody like searching through and pouring through their own memories, looking to recontextualize those moments and prescribe meaning to things that may not have had meaning before, because those memories are really all that we have of them. What I think is magical about watching this movie is how after it ends and after the viewer learns what was really bubbling beneath the surface of this film, they start running back through the movie in their mind, poring over these moments that may have seemed kind of insignificant. It's after that ending that you really start to backtrack and put the pieces together. And the reason I'm calling this like a magical effect of the movie is because the process of doing that with this movie almost mirrors how Sophie feels and the way that she sifts through her own memories. And in the film's absolutely brilliant final shot, the camera pans slowly around Sophie's apartment all the way until we've 180'd 20 years ago, and now we're in the airport with Calum, the moment after Sophie left his sight. And both of them are pointing a camera like at each other, and it almost looks like they're staring at each other through time. And I think the point of Sophie looking back is to get that brief moment where she feels like she is looking at her father again, and to feel like they see each other. And also for a moment right at the end when we see him put the camera down and walk into the darkness, into the rave, I think we wonder for a moment what Calum took with him into that blackness and what he was recording. And it also signals that moment in Sophie's life where her dad started being a memory, which I think is the beginning of a whole new kind of relationship that she now has with her dad. I just think it's so profound how the past and the present collide in this movie and how they influence each other. And it shows why we choose to look back despite how painful it can be, because in a strange way it is cathartic. Looking back is the only way that Sophie can really find her dad again. And I think that's about all I have to say about this movie. Hopefully you now agree that it's a masterpiece because I've just explained to you why. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Was being 11 fun for you?